On September 19, 1940, at approximately 0200 hours, Captain Witold Pilecki of the Polish Home Army walked deliberately into a German street roundup in Warsaw, Poland. He carried false identification papers under the name Tomasz Serafiński. He carried no weapons. He carried no escape tools. He walked directly into captivity, knowing exactly where he was going and what awaited him there. This was not capture. This was infiltration. Pilecki had volunteered for what military historians would later describe as the most dangerous espionage mission of World War II. His objective was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Infiltrate Auschwitz concentration camp. Establish an intelligence network inside. Document Nazi atrocities. Organize prisoner resistance, and survive long enough to report everything to the outside world. The mission parameters were insane. Auschwitz was not a prisoner of war camp governed by Geneva Convention rules. It was an extermination facility designed to kill efficiently and continuously. The average life expectancy for new prisoners was 3 months. Most died within weeks. Disease, starvation, execution, medical experiments, and random violence killed thousands monthly. Pilecki was walking into a death factory with the intention of staying alive long enough to build a resistance network and gather intelligence. Nobody had ever attempted anything like this. Nobody had volunteered to be captured and imprisoned in a Nazi death camp. The mission had no precedent, no historical parallel, and virtually no chance of success. But Pilecki was not a typical soldier. He was 39 years old in September 1940, a veteran cavalry officer who had fought in the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1920. A landowner and reserve officer who had been mobilized when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. He had fought in the defensive campaign, witnessed Poland's defeat, and refused to surrender. When the Polish government collapsed and fled into exile, Pilecki helped establish the underground resistance. He became one of the founding members of the secret Polish army, which later merged into the Home Army, the largest resistance organization in occupied Europe. By mid-1940, rumors about Auschwitz were circulating through Warsaw's underground networks. A new German camp had been established near the town of Oświęcim in southern Poland. Prisoners were being sent there and never returning. The Germans claimed it was a detention camp for political prisoners and resistance members. But information was fragmentary and incomplete. The Polish underground needed intelligence. They needed to know what was happening inside. They needed someone to go in, observe, report, and if possible, organize resistance from within. Pilecki volunteered. His superiors in the Home Army tried to dissuade him. The mission was suicide. Even if he survived the initial imprisonment, even if he established communications, even if he gathered intelligence, there was no extraction plan, no rescue operation, no way out. Pilecki would have to escape on his own, if he could escape at all. Most prisoners never escaped. Most prisoners died. Pilecki insisted. He argued that intelligence from inside Auschwitz was essential. The underground needed to know German intentions. They needed to understand the camp's function, its security, its vulnerabilities. They needed information that could only be obtained from inside, and he believed, perhaps naively, that prisoners could be organized, that resistance was possible, that hope could be maintained even in a death camp. His plan was methodical. He would allow himself to be captured during a German street roundup in Warsaw. The Germans conducted regular łapanka operations, randomly seizing Polish civilians for forced labor or imprisonment. Pilecki would position himself to be caught, use false papers to obscure his military background, and rely on the German transport system to deliver him to Auschwitz. Once inside, he would assess conditions, identify potential resistance members, and establish covert communications with the outside world. The execution began at 0200 hours, on September 19, 1940. Pilecki positioned himself on Łódźka Polskiego Avenue in the Szolibórz district of Warsaw. German forces were conducting a roundup in that sector. Pilecki walked directly into their cordon. He was seized along with approximately 2,000 other Polish civilians. The Germans loaded prisoners onto trucks and transported them to a temporary holding facility at the Warsaw Cavalry Barracks. The holding facility was chaos. 2,000 men crammed into spaces designed for 200, no food, no water, no sanitation. German guards beat prisoners randomly and continuously. Men who protested were shot. Men who resisted were beaten to death. The message was clear and brutal: resistance meant death. Compliance might mean survival. Pilecki remained silent. He followed orders. He did not protest. He blended into the mass of prisoners, just another Polish civilian caught in a German sweep. His false papers identified him as Tomasz Serafiński, a relatively common name with no military associations. The Germans processed him as a political prisoner without conducting deep background investigations. In the chaos of processing 2,000 prisoners, individual scrutiny was minimal. On September 21, 1940, approximately 1,700 prisoners were loaded onto trains. The transport consisted of freight cars, approximately 100 men per car, packed so tightly that sitting was impossible. The journey to Auschwitz took approximately 12 hours, no food, no water, no toilets. Men urinated where they stood. Some died standing up, held upright by the press of bodies around them. The train arrived at Auschwitz at approximately 2200 hours on September 21. The prisoners were unloaded onto a platform and formed into ranks. SS guards with dogs surrounded them. Searchlights illuminated the scene with harsh white light. An SS officer addressed the prisoners in German. The speech was short and direct. "You have arrived at a concentration camp. You are here because you are enemies of the Reich. You will work. Those who work will eat. Those who refuse to work will be shot. Escape is impossible. Attempted escape results in execution. Obedience may result in survival. Disobedience results in death. That is all you need to know." The prisoners were marched through the main gate. Above the gate was a slogan in wrought iron letters, Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. It was a lie. Work killed you slower than bullets, but it killed you just as surely. Pilecki was assigned prisoner number 4859. The number was tattooed on his left forearm. It would remain there for the rest of his life, and permanent identification mark. He was issued a striped prison uniform, a pair of wooden clogs, and a cloth cap. No underwear. No socks, no coat. This was his entire wardrobe for a Polish winter where temperatures regularly dropped below freezing. He was assigned to Block 17, a brick barracks building designed to house 200 prisoners. It currently held 700. Men slept in 3-tier bunks, 4 men per bunk designed for 2. There was no heating. The windows had no glass. Wind and snow blew directly into the building. Prisoners slept pressed against each other for warmth. Many died during the night and were discovered frozen in the morning. The daily routine was designed to destroy human beings systematically and efficiently. Wake up at 0430 hours. Roll call at 0500 hours, standing in formation regardless of weather, sometimes for hours, while guards conducted counts and recounts. Breakfast consisting of ersatz coffee made from burnt grain and a piece of bread weighing approximately 300 grams. Work details departing at 0700 hours. 12 hours of forced labor. Return at 1900 hours. Evening roll call. Dinner consisting of watery soup containing potato peels and occasional vegetable scraps. Lights out at 2100 hours. The work was designed to exhaust and kill. Prisoners hauled stones from quarries. They dug drainage ditches in frozen ground. They constructed additional barracks using primitive tools. They moved heavy materials without machinery, relying entirely on human muscle power. The work quotas were deliberately impossible to meet. Guards beat prisoners who worked too slowly. Prisoners who collapsed were beaten until they stood up or died. Either outcome was acceptable to the SS. The food was calculated to starve prisoners gradually. The daily caloric intake was approximately 1,300 calories. A man performing heavy labor requires approximately 3,500 calories daily to maintain body weight. The deficit was 2,200 calories per day. Simple mathematics determined survival time. An average man weighing 70 kilograms with 15% body fat had approximately 10 kilograms of fat reserves. At a 2,200 calorie daily deficit, those reserves would be depleted in approximately 40 days. After that, the body would begin consuming muscle tissue. Death from starvation typically occurred when body weight dropped to 50% of original weight. For a 70-kilogram man, that meant death at 35 kilograms. The timeline was approximately 90 to 120 days from arrival to death. Disease accelerated the process. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery, and pneumonia killed faster than starvation. The barracks had no sanitation. Latrines consisted of open pits. Drinking water came from the same source as sewage disposal. Typhus spread through lice infestations. Every prisoner had lice. Thousands of lice. The insects lived in the seams of the prison uniforms and fed continuously on prisoner blood. Typhus fever killed approximately 30% of those infected. The disease caused high fever, delirium, and organ failure. There was no treatment. Infected prisoners either survived through their immune response or died within 2 weeks. Medical care was non-existent. The camp hospital was primarily a selection facility. Prisoners too sick to work were sent to the hospital. Those who did not recover within a few days were given lethal injections of phenol directly into the heart. The injections were administered by prisoner doctors under SS supervision. Refuse to administer the injections and the doctor would be executed and replaced. The system was designed to make prisoners complicit in their own destruction. Random violence was constant and unpredictable. Kapors, prisoners appointed as supervisors, maintained discipline through brutality. A kapor carried a club and was authorized to beat prisoners for any reason or no reason. Kapors who failed to maintain discipline were demoted back to regular prisoner status, which usually meant death within weeks. The system created incentives for maximum cruelty. Show mercy and you would be killed. Show brutality and you might survive. SS guards shot prisoners randomly for entertainment. A guard might order a prisoner to retrieve a cap that the guard had thrown beyond the camp perimeter. When the prisoner crossed the warning line to retrieve the cap, the guard would shoot him for attempting to escape. This was called shooting at the fence. Guards competed for the highest kill counts. Prisoners were targets, not human beings. Into this environment, Pilecki began his mission. His first objective was survival. Without survival, all other objectives were impossible. He needed to last longer than the average 3 months. He needed to maintain physical strength despite starvation rations. He needed to avoid disease despite appalling sanitary conditions. He needed to avoid violence despite random brutality. And he needed to do all of this while establishing an intelligence network. Survival required understanding the camp's systems and exploiting every possible advantage. Pilecki identified several key factors that determined survival probability. Work assignment was critical. Some work details were death sentences. The Strafkompanie, the punishment company, performed the hardest labor under the most brutal supervision. Assignment to the Strafkompanie typically meant death within 2 weeks. Other work details were less deadly. Indoor work assignments, particularly in workshops, offered shelter from weather and slightly less brutal supervision. The camp kitchen was the most desirable assignment. Kitchen workers had access to extra food, which dramatically increased survival probability. Pilecki needed a workshop assignment. He claimed skills in carpentry and construction. This was partially true. He had managed his family estate before the war and had practical knowledge of building techniques. More importantly, he presented himself as competent and reliable. Kapors preferred reliable workers who met quotas and caused no problems. A prisoner who worked steadily, followed orders, and did not attract attention was more likely to be kept in a tolerable work detail. Within 3 weeks, Pilecki was assigned to a construction workshop. The work was still hard, still exhausting, but it was indoors and marginally less brutal than outdoor labor. This assignment increased his survival probability significantly. The second survival factor was social connections. Isolated prisoners died quickly. They had no one to help them when they fell sick, no one to share extra food, no one to warn them about dangers. Pilecki began identifying other prisoners who showed intelligence, resilience, and integrity. He looked for men who had not been completely dehumanized, men who still maintained some sense of purpose and dignity. He found them. Despite the camp's brutality, despite the systematic dehumanization, some prisoners maintained their humanity. They shared food when they could. They helped weaker prisoners. They resisted the camp's psychological destruction. These men became the foundation of Pilecki's resistance network. The network grew slowly and carefully. Pilecki could not simply approach prisoners and announce his intentions. The camp was filled with informers. Some prisoners collaborated with the SS in exchange for extra food or better work assignments. Revealing the resistance network to an informer would result in immediate execution for everyone involved. Pilecki developed a recruitment process. He would observe a prisoner for weeks, assessing character and reliability. He would initiate casual conversations, testing the prisoner's attitudes and beliefs. If the prisoner seemed trustworthy, Pilecki would share small pieces of information, gradually revealing more as trust developed. If the prisoner responded positively, he would be brought into the network. If the prisoner showed any signs of being an informer, contact would be discontinued. By December 1940, 3 months after his arrival, Pilecki had recruited approximately 100 prisoners into his network. The organization was cellular. Most members knew only a few other members. This compartmentalization provided security. If one member was compromised, he could only betray a small number of others, not the entire network. The network served multiple functions. The primary function was intelligence gathering. Members observed and documented everything. The number of prisoners arriving, the number dying, the methods of execution, the locations of gas chambers and crematoria, the names of SS personnel, the camp's industrial operations, the supply systems, the guard routines. Everything was recorded mentally, as written records were impossible to maintain. The second function was mutual aid. Network members shared food when possible, they helped each other during illness. They warned each other about dangers, they provided psychological support, maintaining hope when everything seemed hopeless. This mutual aid increased survival rates significantly. Network members survived at approximately double the rate of isolated prisoners. The third function was communications with the outside world. This was the most dangerous and most critical aspect of the operation. Pilecki needed to send intelligence reports to the Home Army in Warsaw. But Auschwitz was designed to be a sealed facility. No communication with the outside world was permitted. All prisoner mail was censored and restricted. Sending uncensored reports required covert methods. Pilecki developed several communication channels. The first channel used civilian workers who entered the camp daily to perform maintenance and construction work. Some of these workers were sympathetic to prisoners. Some could be bribed with valuables, smuggled into camp. Pilecki identified trustworthy civilians and recruited them as couriers. These civilians would smuggle written reports out of camp hidden in their clothing or tools. The reports were written on scraps of paper in microscopic handwriting. A single small paper scrap could contain several thousand words of intelligence. The second channel used prisoners assigned to work details outside the main camp. Some work details traveled to nearby towns to perform labor. These prisoners had brief opportunities to make contact with the outside world. Messages could be passed to Polish civilians, who would forward them to Home Army contacts. The third channel used the camp's underground economy. Despite brutal conditions, an illegal economy existed within Auschwitz. Prisoners traded stolen food, clothing, and other goods. Some SS guards participated in this black market, trading goods and information for valuables. Pilecki exploited this system, using it to send messages and receive supplies from outside. By March 1941, 6 months after his arrival, Pilecki had successfully transmitted his first comprehensive intelligence report to the Home Army in Warsaw. The report documented the camp's function, its mortality rates, and its systematic extermination policies. This was the first divulged detailed intelligence on Auschwitz's operations to reach the outside world. The report described the camp's structure. Auschwitz, the main camp, contained approximately 15,000 to 20,000 prisoners in early 1941. The camp was expanding rapidly. Construction crews were building additional barracks constantly. New transports arrived weekly, bringing thousands of prisoners. But the prisoner population remained relatively stable, which meant mortality rates matched arrival rates. Approximately 2,000 to 3,000 prisoners were dying monthly from starvation, disease, execution, and medical experiments. The report described the selection process. Prisoners arriving at the camp underwent immediate selection by SS doctors. Those judged fit for work were admitted to the camp. Those judged unfit, primarily the elderly, the sick, and small children, were sent directly to execution. Initially, execution was by shooting. Later, the camp introduced gas chambers using Zyklon B poison gas. The gas chambers could kill thousands daily. The report described medical experiments. SS doctors used prisoners as test subjects for medical research. Experiments included testing resistance to infectious diseases, testing new surgical procedures, and testing pharmaceutical compounds. The experiments were conducted without anesthetic and without concern for prisoner survival. Subjects who survived experiments were typically killed afterward to prevent them from reporting what had been done to them. Pilecki's reports shocked the Home Army leadership. The scale of killing exceeded anything they had imagined. This was not a detention camp, this was an industrial-scale extermination facility. The reports were forwarded to the Polish government in exile in London. The Polish government shared the intelligence with British authorities. The British government received the reports with skepticism. The descriptions seemed too extreme to be credible. Surely the Nazis were not systematically murdering prisoners on this scale. Surely this was exaggeration or propaganda. But Pilecki's reports continued. Every few months, new intelligence reached Warsaw and London. The reports were consistent, detailed, and corroborated by other sources. Gradually, the Allies began to accept that the reports were accurate. Auschwitz was a death factory. The Nazis were implementing systematic genocide. Meanwhile, inside the camp, Pilecki's organization continued growing. By mid-1941, the network included approximately 500 members. The organization had structure and discipline. It was divided into sections responsible for different functions: intelligence gathering, communications, mutual aid, and military preparation. Military preparation was the most ambitious and dangerous aspect of the network's activities. Pilecki believed that prisoners could be organized into a military force capable of seizing the camp if external support arrived. The plan required weapons, training, and coordination. Weapons could be stolen from workshops and storage areas. Prisoners working in construction had access to tools that could be converted to weapons. Prisoners working in the kitchen had access to knives. Prisoners working in repair shops could manufacture crude weapons from scrap metal. The network began accumulating weapons slowly and carefully. A knife stolen here, a hammer hidden there. Metal pieces shaped into crude daggers. By late 1941, the network had hidden approximately 30 improvised weapons in various locations throughout the camp. Training was conducted covertly. Network members would teach each other basic combat skills during work breaks, disguising the training as ordinary physical activity. The training was limited, but it was better than nothing. Coordination required detailed planning. Pilecki developed a detailed plan for a prison uprising. The plan assumed that the Home Army would launch a military attack on Auschwitz from outside, creating chaos and distracting the SS guards. Simultaneously, prisoners would seize weapons from guard posts and armories. Network members would kill coppers and collaborators. The combined internal and external assault would overwhelm the SS guards and liberate the camp. The plan was ambitious, perhaps impossible. But it gave prisoners hope. It gave them something to work toward. It prevented complete psychological collapse. Men who believed liberation was possible survived longer than men who accepted their fate as inevitable. Pilecki lobbied the Home Army to approve the operation. His reports included detailed intelligence on camp security, guard routines, and vulnerabilities. He argued that a surprise attack could succeed if properly coordinated. He requested that the Home Army organize a military force and launch the liberation attack. The Home Army considered the proposal. Military planners studied Pilecki's intelligence. They analyzed the feasibility of a military assault on Auschwitz. Their conclusion was pessimistic. Auschwitz was located in German-occupied territory far from Home Army operational bases. Mounting a military attack would require moving substantial forces through German-controlled areas. The SS garrison at Auschwitz numbered approximately 3,000 men with heavy weapons, fortifications, and air support. A successful assault would require overwhelming force, at least 10,000 to 15,000 troops with artillery and armor. The Home Army did not have those resources. The entire Home Army numbered approximately 100,000 members in 1941, but most were lightly armed partisans scattered across Poland. Concentrating 15,000 troops for an attack on Auschwitz would strip defenses from other areas and invite German retaliation. Even if the attack succeeded and liberated the camp, what then? The freed prisoners would be in German-held territory with no means of reaching Allied lines. The Germans would launch immediate counterattacks. Recapturing the camp would be easy. Massacring the freed prisoners would be easier. The Home Army declined to authorize the operation. The military calculus was brutal but rational. Sacrificing 15,000 Home Army soldiers to liberate 20,000 prisoners who would likely be recaptured within days was not a viable operation. The resources would be better used in other resistance activities. Pilecki received the decision in early 1942. There would be no liberation attack. No external assault, no rescue operation. The prisoners were on their own. This was devastating news. Pilecki had sustained hope for over a year by believing that liberation was coming, that the Home Army would attack, that prisoners could be freed. Learning that no attack would occur was psychologically crushing, but Pilecki did not abandon his mission. He continued gathering intelligence. He continued maintaining the network. He continued helping prisoners survive. By 1942, Auschwitz was expanding massively. The camp complex now included three main sections: Auschwitz Attard, the original camp; Auschwitz II Birkenau, a massive new camp designed specifically for mass extermination; and Auschwitz III Monowitz, a labor camp serving nearby industrial facilities. The total prisoner population exceeded 100,000, monthly death rates exceeded 10,000. Birkenau was the nightmare made manifest. It contained 4 large gas chambers with associated crematoria. Each gas chamber could kill 2,000 people simultaneously. The crematoria could burn thousands of bodies daily. The camp was receiving transports of Jews from across occupied Europe. Entire communities were arriving by train, being unloaded onto selection platforms, being sorted into those fit for work and those designated for immediate death, and being marched directly to gas chambers. The scale of killing was industrial. This was not random violence. This was systematic genocide, implemented with German efficiency. The SS had optimized every step of the murder process. Deception was used to prevent panic. Prisoners were told they were going to showers. They were instructed to remember their belongings' locations so they could retrieve them afterward. They entered the gas chambers calmly, believing they were entering shower rooms. The doors were sealed. Cyclone pellets were dropped through ceiling vents. Death occurred within 15 to 20 minutes. The bodies were removed, the chamber was ventilated. The next group was brought in. The process repeated continuously. Pilecki documented everything. His reports described the gas chambers, the crematoria, the selection process, the transport schedules. He estimated the death toll: thousands per day, tens of thousands per month. The reports reached London. They reached Washington. They reached Allied military headquarters. The information was now irrefutable. The Holocaust was happening. The Nazis were implementing the systematic extermination of European Jews. But even with this intelligence, the Allies did not intervene militarily at Auschwitz. The camp was not bombed. The railways leading to Auschwitz were not targeted. Allied military planners argued that bombing the camp would kill prisoners. They argued that destroying the railways would be ineffective because the Germans would repair them quickly. They argued that the best way to save prisoners was to win the war as quickly as possible through conventional military operations. These arguments were rational. They were also inadequate. Thousands died daily, while Allied bombers flew missions over Germany. The camps continued operating until Soviet forces physically liberated them in 1944 and 1945. Pilecki remained in Auschwitz through 1942 and into early 1943. By this time he had been imprisoned for over 2.5 years. This was far beyond the average survival time. Most prisoners who entered Auschwitz in September 1940 were dead within months. Pilecki had survived through intelligence, discipline, and his resistance network. But by early 1943, his situation was deteriorating. The network had been partially compromised. Several members had been arrested and executed. The Gestapo was investigating unauthorized communications from the camp. Pilecki's false identity was under scrutiny. If the Germans discovered his true identity as a Polish army officer and resistance organizer, he would be executed immediately and brutally. Pilecki decided to escape. He had accomplished his primary mission. He had infiltrated the camp. He had established an intelligence network. He had documented Nazi atrocities. He had transmitted critical intelligence to the Allies. Staying longer risked capture and the complete destruction of his network. It was time to leave. Escape from Auschwitz was considered impossible. The camp was surrounded by multiple layers of security. Electrified fences. Guard towers with searchlights and machine guns. Patrols with dogs. An exclusion zone extending several kilometers beyond the camp perimeter. Prisoners who attempted escape were almost always caught and executed. Their executions were public, designed to deter others from attempting escape. Despite this, escapes occasionally succeeded. Pilecki had studied every successful and unsuccessful escape attempt. He had identified patterns. Most escapes failed because prisoners acted impulsively without planning. Successful escapes required careful preparation, detailed planning, insider assistance, and perfect timing. Pilecki's plan exploited his work assignment. He worked in a camp bakery located near the camp perimeter. The bakery received deliveries from outside suppliers. Delivery vehicles entered and exited the camp through a gate with less stringent security than the main gate. Pilecki planned to hide in a delivery vehicle and ride out of the camp. The plan required assistance. He needed accomplices inside the camp to help him hide and to create diversions. He needed contacts outside the camp to provide shelter once he escaped. He needed timing coordination to ensure he escaped during a shift change when guard attention was divided. On April 26, 1943, at approximately 2000 hours, Pilecki and two other prisoners, Jan Redzer and Edward Cielski, executed the escape plan. They overpowered a guard, stole his weapons and uniform, cut through the camp's outer fence, and fled into the surrounding countryside. They traveled approximately 100 kilometers on foot over 3 days, moving at night and hiding during the day. They received assistance from Polish civilians who provided food, shelter and directions. On April 29, 1943, they reached Warsaw and made contact with Home Army headquarters. Pilecki had successfully infiltrated Auschwitz, survived 947 days of imprisonment, established a resistance network, transmitted critical intelligence, and escaped. It was one of the most remarkable intelligence operations in military history. Pilecki immediately began writing a comprehensive report on his experiences. The report, later known as Witold's report, ran to dozens of pages and provided detailed documentation of Auschwitz's operations, its extermination processes, its prisoner population, and its SS personnel. The report was the most detailed intelligence on the Holocaust available to the Allies during the war. But Pilecki's mission was not finished. He rejoined the Polish resistance and continued fighting. He participated in the Warsaw Uprising of August-October 1944, fighting against German forces in the desperate attempt to liberate Warsaw before Soviet forces arrived. The uprising failed. Pilecki was captured by German forces and spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner of war in Germany. He was liberated by American forces in May 1945. The war was over, he had survived. He returned to Poland, expecting to help rebuild his country. Instead, he found Poland occupied by Soviet forces. The communist regime installed by Stalin viewed the Home Army as a threat. Home Army members were arrested, imprisoned, and executed as alleged enemies of the state. Pilecki refused to flee. He believed he could gather intelligence on Soviet occupation and transmit it to Polish forces in exile. In 1947, Pilecki was arrested by Polish communist authorities. He was accused of being a Western spy. He was tortured during interrogation. He was subjected to a show trial in 1948. The trial was a mockery. The verdict was predetermined. He was sentenced to death. On May 25, 1948, at approximately 2200 hours, Witold Pilecki was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head in Mokotów prison in Warsaw. He was 47 years old. His body was disposed of in an unmarked mass grave. The location remains unknown. His story was suppressed by the communist regime. For decades, his name was erased from Polish history. His reports were classified or destroyed. His military records were sealed. The man who had voluntarily entered Auschwitz, who had organized resistance inside a death camp, who had provided critical intelligence on the Holocaust, was officially forgotten. The truth began emerging after communism collapsed in Poland in 1989. Historians recovered his reports. Survivors from his resistance network testified about his activities. Military records were declassified. Gradually, Pilecki's story became known. In 1995, Witold Pilecki was posthumously reinstated to the Polish army with the rank of colonel. In 2006, he was posthumously awarded the Order of the White Eagle, Poland's highest decoration. In 2013, he was posthumously promoted to the rank of cavalry captain. His reports on Auschwitz are now recognized as among the most important historical documents of the Holocaust. The mathematics of his mission are staggering. He volunteered to be imprisoned in a facility designed to kill its prisoners. He survived 947 days in conditions where average survival was 90 days. He organized a resistance network of over 1,000 members inside a death camp. He transmitted dozens of intelligence reports documenting genocide. He escaped from a camp that was considered escape-proof. And he did all of this knowing there would be no rescue, no extraction, no external support. His network saved lives. Mutual aid among network members increased survival rates measurably. His intelligence informed Allied understanding of Nazi atrocities. His reports provided documentation that would later be used in war crimes prosecutions. His resistance provided hope to prisoners who had every reason to despair. The lesson of Witold Pilecki is not about heroism, though his actions were heroic. It is about the limits of military power and the importance of intelligence. Pilecki provided detailed, accurate intelligence on Auschwitz's operations beginning in 1940. The Allies received this intelligence. They knew what was happening. They knew where it was happening. They knew how to stop it. They chose not to stop it through direct military intervention. Military calculus determined that resources were better used elsewhere. This was rational. It was also insufficient. Thousands died daily while the Allies debated whether bombing Auschwitz was militarily justified. Pilecki understood this. In his final writings, he expressed no bitterness toward the Allies for not liberating Auschwitz. He understood military reality. Resources are finite. Choices must be made. Saving everyone is impossible. But he also expressed profound disappointment that intelligence, no matter how detailed and accurate, was insufficient to change policy. The Holocaust occurred not because the world did not know. The world knew, Pilecki told them, other witnesses told them. The intelligence was comprehensive and credible. The Holocaust occurred because the world chose not to intervene militarily even when they knew. This is the uncomfortable truth that Pilecki's story reveals. Intelligence alone does not change outcomes. Power changes outcomes. The Nazis had the power to kill. The Allies had the power to stop them. The Allies chose not to use that power at Auschwitz until Soviet forces physically arrived in January 1945. By then, over 1.1 million people had been murdered at Auschwitz. Most were Jews killed in gas chambers. Others were Poles, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, and various other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. The death toll represents one of history's greatest atrocities. Witold Pilecki provided the intelligence that could have stopped it sooner. He did everything humanly possible. He risked everything. He sacrificed everything. And in the end, his intelligence was insufficient because those who received it chose not to act on it with military force. That is the tragedy of Witold Pilecki. Not that he failed, but that he succeeded in providing intelligence that was ignored by those with the power to act on it. He walked into Auschwitz voluntarily. He survived the unsurvivable. He reported the truth, and the truth was not enough.